Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive in. Today, we're going to tackle the world of poetry,
Ooh, nice.
but specifically haiku.
Okay.
And we've got a whole bunch of sources, definitions, famous examples, even tips on analyzing poetry.
Sounds good.
And what we want to do today, our mission, I guess, is to figure out
Yeah.
what makes haiku so impactful,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're so short,
Right.
but also how understanding haiku can make us better readers of anime kind of poetry.
I like it because it's true, that haiku thing, they pack a punch.
They do. So, like,
Yeah.
everyone knows haiku, right? 3 lines,
Yeah.
575 syllables.
And that's what we learn.
But our sources were saying translating from Japanese can be tricky.
Oh, yeah, big time.
It's not always so straightforward.
It's not just about counting syllables, right?
Right.
Like in Japanese, they use these things called moras.
Us.
Yeah, moras. They're like units of sound, but not always the same as a syllable.
Huh.
And then there's kireiji, which are like,
Guriji.
yeah, no, it's a mouthful. But they're basically these special cutting words
Okay.
that create pauses in the poem.
Oh, instead of, like, just relying on the line breaks.
Exactly. It's more about how the thought flows, not just hitting that syllable count.
So it's less about being strict with the structure and more about the feeling,
Yes, you got it.
capturing that image, the emotion, in those few lines.
And it's amazing how powerful that can be, even with so few words.
Right?
Like there's this haiku by Issa, only one guy and only one fly trying to make the guest room do.
Oh, I love that one.
That's funny, right?
It's so relatable. Who hasn't had to deal with a pesky fly buzzing around?
Exactly. But it also makes you think, doesn't it?
About
How we're always kind of interacting with nature,
oh, yeah.
even in these really ordinary moments.
Like profound and funny at the same time.
Exactly. Which is what haiku does so well.
It's like capturing a whole world just with a few carefully chosen words,
Mm-hmm. And since there's limited space, each word has to be super impactful.
which is why imagery is so important in haiku, right?
Absolutely. You often see these classic images.
Yeah.
Cherry blossoms, the moon, certain animal.
Right.
And those images aren't just random.
Oh, I bet not.
They're chosen to evoke a very specific feeling.
Like a sense of place and time.
You got it. And that leads us to this concept called kigo.
Kigo, what's that?
They're seasonal words that, like, instantly set the mood of the poem.
Oh, so like if you see cherry blossom, you know it's spring. And that brings in all these associations.
Exactly. There's this great haiku by Moritake. What I thought to be flowers soaring to their boughs were bright butterflies.
Oh, I love that one. It's like you think it's one thing and then surprise.
Right.
It's butterflies, not blossoms.
It's playful, but it also shows you how haiku can use hildery to shift your whole perspective.
And it captures that feeling of discovery, you know?
Yeah.
Like that aha moment.
Yes. Perfectly said.
But our sources were saying that haiku isn't just stuck in the past, right?
Definitely not.
It's evolved beyond just nature and seasons.
For sure. Like, take Carolyn Kaiser's After Basho.
Interesting.
It uses the haiku form, but to pay tribute to another poet.
So it's showing you haiku can be about more than just the traditional themes. And then there's Sonia Sanchez's Come On Man, Hold Me.
Oh, that one's a real rule breaker.
It's like so different from anything we've talked about.
It definitely pushes the boundaries of what we typically think of as haiku.
It's got informal language, that choppy rhythm.
Right. It doesn't sound like a classic haiku at all.
But it does, somehow.
And that's exactly Sanchez's point.
What do you mean?
She's challenging our ideas about what haiku can be.
Oh, I see.
She's showing how adaptable the form is.
So are you saying even if we don't write haiku ourselves, understanding this stuff makes us better readers of A&E Wei's poetry?
Absolutely. And that brings us to some common myths about reading poetry in general.
Oh, good. I think I've fallen for some of those.
Like, the first one is you have to get it on the first read.
Oh, yeah, that makes me feel dumb.
But it's not a test, right? It's a conversation.
Okay, that's a better way to think about it.
And it's not a secret code either.
Right. Like there's no hidden meaning I need a decoder ring for.
But it does require paying attention to the clues the poet gives you.
Clues.
And it's not about just deciding the poem means whatever you want it to mean.
Right. There's got to be some connection to what the poet intended.
Exactly. The meaning isn't arbitrary.
But it's also more than just, like, looking up every word in the dictionary.
It's about understanding all those layers of meaning the poet is crafting.
So how do we unlock those deeper layers? One of our sources talked a lot about reading aloud.
Ah, yes. Reading aloud is key.
Why that?
Because you start to hear the sounds of the words, the rhythm, any special effects the poet is using.
Oh, so you're not just taking in the words visually, but orally too.
Exactly.
And what about line breaks? They're not random either, are they?
Nope. They're very deliberate.
Okay.
Some lines are end-stopped, meaning they end with a complete thought,
Okay.
but others run on, carrying the thought to the next line.
And that creates a different feeling.
A huge difference.
So the shape of the poem on the page is actually working with the words to create meaning.
You got it.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And this connects back to haiku and kirigi.
Oh, right, those cutting words.
Exactly. Those pauses shape the meaning, whether they come from punctuation or line breaks.
Okay.
Take Robert Creeley's poem, The Language.
I don't know that one.
He does this thing where he breaks the lines to create these secondary meanings that are kind of unsettling.
Unsettling how?
Like there's this line, the language, a language.
Okay.
By putting is all alone on a line, he's making us pay attention to it.
Oh, I see.
It's not just that language exists, but its very being is significant.
Whoa, yeah.
Almost menacing, right?
It changes the whole feel of the line.
Exactly.
So we need to pay attention to how those lines break, how they impact the flow of the poem.
Absolutely. It's all part of the poet's toolkit.
But what about context? Like when or where a poem was written?
Well, it's always best to start with just the poem itself and see what you find.
Okay, so don't get bogged down in background info right away.
Right. But context can definitely illuminate a poem's meaning.
Especially if it's about political or social stuff, I bet.
Yeah, for sure. One source had this anecdote about a poet finding graffiti.
Graffiti.
Yeah, it said La Raza on some rocks by artichoke fields.
Okay.
And at first, she didn't get why it was there. But later she learned those fields were a site of labor exploitation.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly the graffiti had this whole new layer of meaning.
Because it was tied to that specific place in its history.
Exactly.
So sometimes we need to dig a little deeper to understand a poem fully.
Yeah, the meaning can go way beyond the surface.
Okay, so we've talked about line breaks, sounds, context. But what about ambiguity?
Ah, yes. Ambiguity, the big one.
This is where I get stuck.
I get it. We're so used to wanting one right answer,
Like, solve the puzzle and be done with it.
But art isn't like that.
So it's less about solving a puzzle and more about...
Embracing the mystery.
Ooh, I like that.
Think of it like a long-term relationship.
Yes.
There's familiarity, but you're always rediscovering things.
You're always learning new things about the other person.
Exactly. We're so conditioned to want definite answers, but art is about openness to interpretation.
I love that analogy. The more time you spend with a poem, the more you uncover.
Precisely. And the more we embrace that uncertainty, the richer the experience becomes.
So it's not about finding the meaning, but being open to all the possibilities.
Yes. And that's key to really appreciating haiku.
This reminds me of what we were saying about context.
Oh, right. How the meaning of a haiku can change depending on when and where you read it.
Like that cherry blossom example.
Exactly. If you read it during a celebration, it might feel joyful.
But if you read it after a loss, it could feel melancholy.
It's like the haiku is interacting with the world around it.
Its meaning evolves as the context changes.
It's almost like a living thing.
That's a fantastic way to put it.
And that's part of what makes haiku so fascinating, right?
It's a living art form, always being reinterpreted. This has been so eye-opening. Structure, imagery, sound, humor, ambiguity.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I already want to go back and reread some of those haikus.
Yes. See what else you discover.
Remember, the journey is as important as the destination. Well said. I think our listeners are ready to continue that journey on their own.
Me too. Maybe they'll even be inspired to write their own haiku.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, there's one more crucial thing we need to address.
It's easy to forget that poetry isn't just about words on a page.
Oh, you mean like the performance aspect?
Yeah. Sound plays a huge role, too.
Right. Like how you read it aloud.
Exactly. Think about that haiku we discussed.
And what about lightning?
Yeah. Lightning in the sky, in the deeper dark is heard a night heron's cry.
Oh, right. That one really stuck with me.
Why do you think that is?
It's atmospheric for sure.
Think about the sounds.
The sounds.
Like that sharp K sound in sky.
Mimics the crack of lightning.
Exactly. And then that long E sound of the heron's cry.
Oh, it's like you can hear the darkness too.
Basho, the poet, was playing with our senses.
How so?
We expect thunder after lightning, right? But instead...
there's this unexpected bird call.
Yeah. Creates this tension, this surprise.
And he does all that in just 3 lines.
The power of haiku.
It's not just seeing the lightning, it's hearing it.
And then hearing the heron's reaction.
It's like a whole little scene unfolding.
Right. Those sensory details are key to haiku's power.
So it's not just about the image, but the whole experience.
It's about immersing the reader, not just describing.
Like a miniature symphony,
Oh, I like that.
blending sound and imagery within those 3 lines.
And each element contributes to the overall effect, just like in a symphony.
We often think of poetry as being very serious, intellectual.
Yeah, but you know what else haiku can be?
Hmm.
Humorous.
Oh, right. Like that Issa one with the fly in the guest room.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Humor can make the reader more receptive.
Even if the poem's dealing with something complex.
It adds this whole other layer.
It's like disarming, You're
Yeah.
chuckling, but then the meaning sneaks up on you.
Exactly. Haiku uses humor so cleverly.
But of course, the big question with any poetry, especially haiku.
The question of meaning.
Yeah. Like we said, it's not just anything you want it to be.
Right, it's not arbitrary.
But how do we figure out what a haiku is trying to say? Where do we even start?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And with haiku, there's not always one right answer.
Oh no, not that again.
It's known for being suggestive.
Meaning.
It hints at a deeper meaning without spelling it out directly.
So maybe less like solving a puzzle and more like dot exploring.
You got it. Haiku wants us to use our imagination.
To connect the dots.
Between the images, the sounds.
Draw our own conclusions based on the clues the poet gives us.
Exactly. So where might those clues be hiding?
Oh, good question.
Start with the basics. What images are there? What sounds? What emotions come up when you read it?
And how do those all fit together?
Right. It's like you're assembling a jigsaw puzzle.
But what if you've got all the pieces and the picture's still blurry?
That's where the beauty of ambiguity comes in.
Oh, right. Back to that.
Haiku is open to multiple interpretations.
So they can all be valid in their own way.
It's not about finding the answer, but appreciating all the possibilities.
Okay, so be open-minded.
Exactly. And remember that context thing we talked about?
Oh, the graffiti.
Yeah. Context changes how we understand things.
So a haiku about, say, cherry blossoms,
Could be joyful during a celebration.
but sad if you're grieving a loss.
The same haiku, but different feelings.
So the haiku interacts with the world around it,
It's almost like a living thing.
constantly evolving, yeah.
That's part of what makes haiku so endlessly fascinating.
It's a living art form, always being reinterpreted.
This has been such a great conversation. Structure, imagery, sound, humor.
Ambiguity, context.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, I already want to reread those haiku and see what else I find.
That's the spirit. The journey of discovery is part of the fun.
Well said. I think our listeners are ready to continue exploring on their own.
I agree. Maybe they'll even try writing some haiku themselves.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up completely, there's one more huge thing we have to talk about. We spent all this time talking about how to read and understand haiku and poetry in general.
Yeah.
But I think we need to take a step back and ask why.
Why does it matter?
Exactly. Why should any of this matter to our listener? Why care about poetry at all?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? I think poetry, at its core, connects us to something bigger.
Bigger than ourselves, you mean?
Right. It helps us express those feelings, those experiences that are so hard to put into words.
Like those everyday words just aren't enough.
And haiku, especially with that focus on imagery, it's perfect for capturing fleeting moments.
Like little snapshots of beauty, wonder, even sorrow.
Exactly. Those tiny slices of the human experience distilled into their purest form.
I love that. And it's not just passive reading.
Oh, no, not at all.
We're actively engaging with the poet's thoughts, their feelings.
We're being invited to see the world through their eyes.
To experience life from a new perspective.
And that can be so powerful.
It can open our minds to new possibilities.
Make us question things we might take for granted.
Maybe even make us more empathetic.
Exactly. More understanding of others.
A lot of people are intimidated by poetry.
Oh, for sure.
They think it's too difficult, too intellectual.
But our sources were really saying it's not about being smart.
It's more about